Today we're going to work on another little formation using our Tengpai. We could start off with just the Dao so you can see things a little clearly at first, and then we'll right away put the shield into it because they really are designed to work together, and it works quite differently than when you're only armed with a saber. I put two spears down here on the floor, just kind of a sort of visual reminder that I would have my comrades here working with me. So context is always important, really, really important, I'd say, because there's always different ways, different approaches, which are, of course, different scenarios. We're using this full-length, good, solid Qing Dao. It's also a type of sword that was also used during the Ming, but typical of the Qing, this gently curved willow leaf. And you know, this is a typical soldier's weapon. This particular weight, the Qing Dao, it's a good heavy sword. It's typical of earlier in the dynasty. They tended to get a little bit lighter as you go later in the dynasty. But this is a good, solid, powerful cutting sword, the kind of sword that you would have to have if your Duifang had on even minimal armor and you need to deliver a blow that would be effective through that armor, even if it's just, you know, a padded vest with some leather over it. You know, you really got to hit hard. In that case, of course, there's no actual cutting going on. It's all about the percussive force that you can deliver through the armor to hopefully dislocate a collarbone, for example. So we're using this full-length Qing Dao, but you'll see many forms, especially in the South, using a Tengpai that use what's called a Paidao, a shield knife, and you could think of it kind of like a big Bowie knife, maybe. I will show one in show and tell sometimes. They usually have blades that are about 14 inches, I would say, in general. To my knowledge, that is not a pattern weapon. It's a weapon that was widely used by militia. So it's sort of a pseudo-military weapon, you could say, used by militias, so not something that that's in the imperial regulations, but something that was in widespread use. Perhaps locally, if they're being manufactured for widespread use, there might have been a pattern that I haven't seen in the manual, could very well have been, but they're just generally good, solid, heavy knives, single-edged knife. And when you see those forms, of course, you see different kinds of movements in those Tengpai forms. There's not many of them. You see things like low sweeps and getting in much closer and thrusting. Kind of think of like Roman gladius kind of idea, tight formation and thrusting. They're not cutting as far out, obviously, as you can with the saber that's several times longer. So a very different approach. So really incumbent on us to understand what we're doing, to visualize the field that you're on, right, which is a battlefield, and I am not here by myself, or it's not even a militia situation where I might have 5 or 6 of my training brothers, and we're fighting with some bandits that happen to be coming to the village. Or often the case historically was those militias were defending themselves from government troops as they, after battles or before battles, sometimes pillaging or often pillaging. So the militias had to protect themselves not only from rebels and bandits, but then from government forces, which acted pretty much in the same fashion of stealing all of their stuff when they got hungry. So that is a different field, is a different chessboard, if you will, than a big line of men who are trained to work together versus a militia where they have, peasants in a militia don't have nearly the kind of time to train or the unification of arms, or even like a set regular commander probably, who trains them and keeps them in line and has them working well together. So here, I've got the spears on the floor because this is like the most space that I'm going to have. It may seem like a lot. It's, if you can see what the panels on the floor, those are 4 foot wide. So I have less than 5 feet across here. I have a little bit extra. I think this is probably about right, because you see when I get my shield here, there isn't going to be much room to move. There are, of course, going to be times when you form a shield wall where they touch, but if it's a loose shield wall or like a Mandarin duck formation or one of those varieties, similar ones, then we've got to have room, because also here I have my 2 spearmen. In the Mandarin duck formation, I think most people know they had the trident behind those, which really were there mostly to protect from overhead blows, protect the spearmen and the ones with the shield, the Tengpai Ying, the shield units, Tengpai, shield, Ying unit. So those guys were also there. But a lot of times the formations, they don't seem like they were really, that's the formation, but it seems that mostly it was spears with shield and saber. But also you have a little bit further back, people with firearms, probably not much further back, but shooting from very close, because they have to be close, because they have to see through these little gaps. And you had, depending on the period, like in the late Ming, they had archers who shot bolts. And those bolts were, about so long, about 35 centimeters, I'd say, you know, about 1.5 feet kind of length. And they're thick, right? So they're like the bolts that a crossbow would shoot. They didn't draw the bow to full, they just draw it back halfway. And if you have a powerful bow, it's coming out of there with 35, 45 pounds of pressure. That's not a lot compared to a war bow that might be 90 pounds pull. But at close range, if you're not armored and you hit that inside, or get it in the leg, or if it's shot towards your face even, and you just even dodge it, it's the whole, you know, formation of men working together. So these guys in the back, they're taking shots at people or reloading, firing their matchlocks, taking out that guy, and then I have to keep this formation. Or if somebody on my side drops, we have to close that formation. But whatever we're doing, whatever is the makeup of weapons here, I have to work in this strip. I can't be doing spinning around kind of movements that you would see, that you can see sometimes in those Tengpai with the Paidao forms. They are much more active forms because they're village militia kind of training, not military kind of training. So I like to take the time, I know we've talked about this a bit in the past, but I like to make this really clear because it's very important if you've ever been to a fencing tournament or seen it on television, you think about the pist, it's about like this, that fencing strip, they cannot go off of it. And it's the same kind of thing here. I can't move very far right and left, and I don't want to because I get in that guy's way. And what I'm mostly doing, my primary job is going to be to hold this line and screen those guys, those two spearmen, so that they can do the fighting. See, I want to stay, right, the tip's out there. I want to stay inside of that, right? But occasionally when if I do come forward for any reason, I don't want to step to the side, slipping out of the way of something, because now you see I've stepped into the line of this spearman. So if he's thrust and pulled back, I'm either in his way or getting it in the back. So you have to really think about this strip. And that is the approach that we're looking at. If you see one of these other forms, one of these southern forms, well, that looks really quite different, or there's things in there that's quite different. Yes, because that is a very different use, a very different context. So keep this in mind. Think about using this in a strip. And I find this, and I think this is very useful. You might say, well, this is very restricted. I think this is quite useful for our swordsmanship in a number of ways. We are practicing the Jianfa, Daofa, and the two-handed saber, and they all have slightly different uses, slightly different characteristics, or actually I could say, in this case, very different use than, say, Jianfa. And so that teaches us how to move and to think and approach a problem strategically and tactically rather than just be stuck with, well, I move this way. Or, gee, he's moving in such a restrictive fashion, I don't like that in this Daofa. What about when you have to move? What about when space is limited? What about when there's several people around, your comrades and the people that you're facing? You need to be able to move in different fashions. So if you only learn one approach, then you're probably limiting yourself. So you may not like this one as much, or may not feel as, you know, that doesn't come to you as easily, or you just don't get it the same way. Nevertheless, see if you can learn to move this way so that when you have to, or it's the best tactic in the situation, you've done it and you're prepared to do it. Okay? So, keeping in mind our strip, let's get to work. So, I'm going to start with a really big